Welcome to the Bookish Hour with your hosts, Sarah E. Burr and J.C. Kenney. We'll be starting soon. And we are live. Good evening, everyone. Welcome to another episode of the Bookish Hour. I am Sarah Burr.
And I am J.C. Kenney, and we are excited to have a fabulous guest tonight. So without further ado, Sarah, I think it's time to get bookish.
Let's get bookish on the eve of a nice holiday weekend that we have coming up. That it makes it all the more fun. And as JC said, we are delighted to be joined by Elle Hartford this week. Elle and I go back for, I guess, probably a couple years now. We are both a part of the New York chapter of Sisters in Crime, which is a great writing organization, both at the national level and our New York chapter. So if you are someone in the New York area looking to get involved, make sure you check us out. Elle, why don't you tell our viewers a little bit about yourself and your books?
Absolutely. Thank you very much, Sarah. All right, let's see. So I write cozy mystery with a fairy tale twist. That's my official tagline. I'd say I also veer into the cozy fantasy world, which is a whole kind of new subgenre that we can talk about later. So my main series is The Alchemical Tales. And then I've got a spin-off series that kind of departs from mystery and is more on the sweet, clean romance side of things. So those are just fun novellas that have the same characters, but it's a new genre that we can play in and we get to see a little bit more of their lives. So that's Pomegranate Cafe Romance. And when I'm not writing, I work for an environmental nonprofit here in Jersey. I look after a three-legged cat named Frankie, who you've probably seen on my social media. If you look at all, you'll probably see pictures of Frankie. And then William, the very grumpy tortoise. So those are my important duties in life.
They are stars in their own right. Absolutely love. Anytime that I see William or Frankie pop up on my feed, it's just like, so much fun. We have some really fun books to talk about this evening. And with the way that you describe your series, Elle, with cozy mystery with a fairy tale twist, how did you decide that was going to be the genre with which you really dove into writing?
That's a good question. I'm not entirely sure that I did decide. I think it just snuck up on me. To be honest, I grew up writing fantasy. And I mean, I read very widely, but I really loved and I wrote fantasy for years and years. And I always kind of felt like mystery was scary. Like to be able to plot out like how are the clues going to be interwoven in the story, and like how do you hide who the killer is, like all that I found very intimidating for a long time as a writer. And actually it was a short story contest like way back, even before the pandemic, I think 2019 or 2020, like early. And they had a variety of prompts to choose from. And one of their prompts, the whole point of the contest was cross-genre writing. And one of their prompts was like they had a selection, mix a thriller with a romance or mix noir with sci-fi or whatever. And one of their mixes was fantasy and cozy mystery. And I was like, oh, well, I know fantasy. I love reading cozy mysteries. Maybe I can. Well, it's a short story. Why not try? So that was actually the first story that I wrote with Red and her friends, who are now the main characters of The Alchemical Tales. And I think just once I dove in, I found that I just loved their little community in Belleville so much. And maybe it was worth learning to figure out how to write a mystery in order to continue.
I mean, I hear that prompt that's cozy mystery and fantasy, and I'm just thinking like of you going challenge accepted.
Exactly.
And like, just what a fun way to start exploring the genre. And
Mhm.
because that was your first like introduction to Red and all of her friends in Belleville, I'm wondering if you can kind of tell our readers a little bit about your main character and kind of the world that she inhabits.
Absolutely. So her name is Red, of course, as you heard me say. That is kind of a nod to Little Red Riding Hood, because she's kind of a seeking character, like going out into the world and looking for things. Her profession in this little like fairy tale kind of fantasy town is she's an alchemist. And this is like in kind of the Dungeons and Dragons sense of like alchemists making potions and like science, but with sort of a magical twist to it. So she makes an absolutely wonderful amateur sleuth, because she has a lab. She has like all
Ah,
sorts of scientific equipment and like, strange botanical knowledge. And because she lives in, this tiny fairy tale town, naturally there is one person for everything, right? There's one baker, there's one alchemist, there's one innkeeper, there's one police officer, and the police officer often finds herself overwhelmed, so she comes to Red for help. So I have kind of like in a lot of cozy mystery, you get kind of the very nosy amateur sleuth. Red is a somewhat reluctant amateur sleuth, because also, and this is part of her arc, not just in like the short story or the first novel, but across the whole series, is kind of emerging from her more science-minded self and being able to see the value in helping her community and kind of finding her place, and allowing her emotions and allowing herself to get involved with people.
that
I
is,
love that.
I tell you what, sign me up now. So one thing I'm curious when you talk about the fantasy world, I grew up, I loved, I cut my teeth on The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe and the rest of the Chronicles of Narnia.
Classic.
From
My
there,
dad read those novels to us. A
nice. Well,
classic.
my wife read those novels to our two kids, so
Aw.
that's always great to hear. But then naturally went on to the Lord of the Rings, and as I've
Mhm.
gotten older, I'm also become a fan of Neil Gaiman and his fantasy. So,
Absolutely.
kind of just for folks who may not be as familiar with kind of the fantasy genre,
Mhm.
um, can you kind of give us a sense of where your stories fit in, compared to, like Narnia, Middle Earth, or more kind of that fantasy London type setting that Gaiman does?
Gotcha. Yeah. And I love that question because that gets into what I was saying earlier about cozy fantasy, which
Okay.
is like we're all familiar with cozy mystery as a genre. Cozy fantasy is really new. And the idea is, that it is a different world, right? So, like Lord of the Rings or Narnia, like we're in another world. But specifically with cozy fantasy, we're not necessarily like fighting tyrants or going on huge adventures. It's more about like the stakes are lower. In fact, one of the classic, I mean, it's such a new genre, you can't really say classic, but one of the most popular cozy fantasy novels is called Legends and Lattes, and its tagline is high fantasy, low stakes. Which I think sums up the genre really nicely. Except then you
Nice.
become really invested in the characters, so it doesn't feel like low stakes anymore, but that's a whole other thing.
I was wondering, it's like, oh, maybe that's where like my Court of Mystery series lies, but I don't think
Right.
it is because
Uh,
it's like too like they are fighting tyrants as well. So
fair.
with a side of murder. Um so yes, so tell us a little bit more about Belleville and how it I guess maybe the role that the town plays in Red's development. Because you were talking about like over the course of the series, she kind of comes out of her science minded shell. How do the
Mhm.
people in the town around her facilitate that?
Ooh, good question. So obviously we have the police officer who's constantly dragging her out of her lab and out of her shop to help investigate murders. So that's Officer Thorne, who you cannot say no to, naturally. But then there is kind of this whole community that supports that, because honestly, I think like that's my favorite part of the cozy mystery genre as a whole, is the community and the way everyone comes together. So we have our best friend / possible love interest, Luca, the very shy bookseller who in the first novel gets himself into a lot of trouble and needs help. And so Red has to kind of like step out of her bounds in order to help him. We have the kind of knowledgeable but very sarcastic cozy companion, who is a big fluffy dog who is also named William after my tortoise, who is there kind of to support and kind of like is sent not to encourage Red, because he does think that investigations are he's very he's very focused on himself and Red. He's like, whatever, these other people, I don't necessarily care. He likes who he likes, and he doesn't care about too many other people. But his support kind of also supports her in being more confident and getting out there, because she knows he has her back. And then we have a bunch of other side characters who come again and again, show up again and again in the books, that we kind of learn more about as the stories progress. So I don't want to give too much away.
I think
but it is a community effort, right?
Yeah, and I think that that's a really good like grouping of who Red's close companions are. And I think that also is a very good teaser for the giveaway that we are doing tonight. Elle has generously offered up a second edition, special edition of Beauty and the Alchemist. Can you talk a little bit, Elle, about like what makes it special?
Yeah, absolutely. So I first released the book, last August. And I had worked really hard on it, and I was very pleased. But I was also just kind of like starting out and learning with my whole self-publishing career. So this year, this April, kind of to celebrate the year anniversary of the Alchemical Tales first coming out into the world with the first short stories, I have gone back and made this special second edition. So right now it's only in ebook form, but it has an extra epilogue from a different character's point of view. So we get to see kind of like the story from a different angle. It has the classic recipes and fun things that cozies often have at the back. And it has just like really fun new formatting. And I did a kind of an updated, very colorful map of Belleville to go along with it. So it's just fun little bonuses like that. And I figured it'd be a fun giveaway because it's also a sneak peek. I'm not actually releasing these until the 20th. So someone gets to see it ahead of time.
That raises the stakes even more.
Nice.
Right?
Okay, well, Elle, I've got to ask, William, does he talk or not?
He does talk. Good question. I should have made that clear. Yes.
And we probably should.
Magical dog.
The magical dog, because we want to make sure that our audience knows that your tortoise does not talk.
Well, fair enough. Thank you, Sarah.
Well, he has a very expressive bearing, but he not with words.
And on a little more serious note, Elle, you have a really interesting, I think, story behind how you came to writing. It's one that especially, kind of there's a lot of, current history to that. So why don't you tell us a little bit about your writing journey and how you ended up here on the Bookish Hour with us two, Goombas?
Sure, absolutely. So I think I mentioned earlier, I did grow up writing, but it wasn't something that I ever thought that I could share. Like I just, I was a very shy child. So I'd just be writing away here in my corner and nobody else needs to see. Right. It took a while, but I'd say probably starting like 5 or 6 years ago, like I started to kind of let go of that shyness a little bit. And honestly, what did it for me was how much my characters meant to me. So for me, writing is very, it's really meaningful. Like, I love it, obviously, as a hobby and as a craft, it's wonderful. But for me, it has a lot of purpose too, because my characters are often helping me kind of get through things in my life. Or like, when I'm having a hard time, often that'll translate to my writing. And it's not necessarily that the character's going through the exact same thing I am, but something similar. And then I can kind of like work through the situation as I see where the story goes. So I developed these really strong bonds to my characters. And I started feeling like, okay, like they deserve a life beyond me, right? I should probably, maybe somebody somewhere else will also be inspired or find this helpful. So I started kind of like researching, thinking like, okay, querying traditional publishing, self-publishing. And then of course the pandemic hit, and I had a lot more time to do that, because I worked in museums, and that did not survive the pandemic. But I spent a lot of time, and I actually queried with Beauty and the Alchemist for a while, long enough that I did get like your traditional offer from a small press. And it forced me to make a decision. It was kind of a big turning point for me, because as a young author, especially like really young as a child, you think like, okay, publication, traditional, like big, like real publication, that means that I've made it. Like you should get that traditional offer letter, and then like, you've arrived, you're happy now. Right? But looking at the real, like the technicalities of the contract and how everything broke down, and thinking about my series, I realized that specifically for the Alchemical Tales, I was treading such a fine line of blended genre, with the cozy mystery and the fantasy. And I was invested, and I had a really specific vision of what I wanted it to be. So I realized after like some long, hard thinking that I was better off doing that myself, and kind of like learning the ropes and making sure I knew I could trust myself to do the best I could to realize this vision. And going traditional publishing, I would have had to give up so much control. I wasn't ready to trust that. Not with this project. Maybe in the future with something else. But that's a very long answer to your question.
No, I mean, there are so many instances there that it's like, oh wow, like I just like feel so much of what you're talking about, especially the part of your writing being an avenue which you can kind of explore things that you're going through, and it may not be the same things that your characters are going through, but it's a way that we can channel the chaos or the clutter or whatever is going on in our lives.
Right.
And I especially feel that with like how the Glenmeyer Wynn mysteries came into existence. It was because the world was falling around us, and it's like, I need a place where I can be happy and escape to, and like not have to worry about terrible things happening to people all of the time. And I had never, until that point, I had never really considered writing to be very therapeutic for me. It was something that, and I guess like looking back now, it's like, obviously it's always been therapeutic for me because it was something I just did. We never had anybody that was like, you have to write this, Sarah. It's like, no, it was something that I wanted to write because of how it made me feel. And so I think that that's a really beautiful thing to express and to share with readers alike, to know like this is like how these books are created.
Thank you. And I love Crucible. So
that was my little haven.
So mission accomplished there.
It's a great town. It's a great series, and Elle, I want to echo what Sarah said too, because I've shared this a number of times with folks that when I first started my writing journey back in 2011, I was in a really bad spot depression wise, and I swear to this day that book that I started writing in August 2011, it saved my life. And it was one of those situations where the characters were there and they started banging on the inside of my head, said, Jim, it's time to write this down. And that got me out of that really dark place. So, cheers to writing,
Cheers.
great
Exactly.
storytelling. And, there's a lot to it.
Definitely. And actually, I like you were saying, like I really feel really strongly that writing can be so helpful, and in fantasy too. Like fantasy, we often think of you like, oh, that's just genre fiction, like whatever. But these fairy tales give us that kind of metaphorical language to be able to, like, this is what I'm going through, but it's in the fairy tale diction. It's like a villain or an ogre or whatever, like we can kind of have that perspective. And actually, on that note, and I'm sorry, I'm going to ramble a little bit.
Ramble away.
This is your show.
I'm going on a tangent, I guess, right? But right now, I'm working on Alchemical Tales Book 5. Like that's the draft that's on the computer right now. And when I first started it, I was having a really hard time because so we're on book 5 of the series. Each book is a retelling of a fairy tale. So the first one, Beauty and the Alchemist, it was Beauty and the Beast, right? And then we go on through some classics. It's only now at book 5 that I'm getting to Cinderella, which is like a big classic.
Mm-hmm.
But I had put it off. And I finally admitted to my newsletter, like as I sent out my newsletter to people, I admitted, I was like, so I'm working on draft 5. It's Cinderella. I'm not sure I like Cinderella. I can't write this draft. I don't know. So I asked the newsletter, I was like, can you guys tell me why you like this story? And I got some wonderful responses back. And a lot of it was, like Cinderella, her story of a good person who is treated poorly, but in the end has, a happy ending. That was really inspiring to a lot of people and helped them through, also very tough times. And so it wasn't until I saw that kind of example of fairy tales and writing in action, stories in action, right, that I realized, there's so much value, even to stories we think we don't like.
Well, and I think that's one of the wonderful things about both the fantasy and the science fiction genres, because they are such fabulous avenues for storytelling with, if you want to call them, with additional mores or morals to the story that you don't even realize what's going on until it's over, and,
Right.
Yeah. So, I just love that.
And
Me
I love
too.
how perceptive your newsletter subscribers
I know,
are.
right?
Wow. I don't think Cinderella is one of the tougher ones, especially when I think of, fairy tales, I go to every Disney movie that I've ever seen. And beyond the mice, there's little about the original animated version of Cinderella that really captured my imagination as a child. But I will say that I was, out of all of the live action remakes that we've seen in recent years, that the story that, oh gosh, what is Camila Cabello, the Prime
That was
Video,
a fun one.
I was
Yeah.
really surprised by wow, they pulled what I didn't realize existed from that storyline. And I was like, oh, well, this gives me a new lease on Cinderella.
Absolutely.
And so when you were kind of at that stage, Elle, and I'm kind of asking this selfishly because I for folks that have been following the past 2 weeks on on my social media, I have just I gave up on the draft of what was book 3 in the trending topic mysteries because I just was I just was not connected. I was like, this mystery doesn't fit with where Coco is in my mind, I guess. It's something that she could solve at one point, but it didn't feel like it was a natural progression after, the mystery that folks will be introduced to in Tag Me for Murder. And so I was
know who did it, but I'm not saying.
And so last Monday, I literally woke up and I was like, I got to come up with something different. I'm going to start over. And luckily, because I had like written a series proposal, I had like the next book in my mind already, and like I knew what that mystery was. So I was like, oh, can I like shuffle it around to like figure out how to work it in? And like, I'm already like 20,000 words in, like feeling great. Like, I can't believe it. I'm so thankful that I made the decision. But I'm curious, like, what was your plan if you're like, like I can't find the inspiration for Cinderella? Like, would you have gone with a different fairy tale, or like what was the worst case scenario?
Ha, good question. I probably would have kept it because I'm stubborn. But I knew what the problem was for me. And so what I would have done without the wonderful insight from my newsletter readers is I just would have kind of beat my head against the wall, or maybe gone for a walk, and thought it over until I could figure out which of the new characters I was really going to identify with. Right, because I find that's what helps me a lot with diving into each book and each draft. Like, if I don't really care about a draft, it's because I'm not caring about like the new characters that we're talking to.
Mhm.
Like, of course I care about Red and William and Officer Thorne and everyone else, but with each story, of course, each mystery brings its own cast of new characters, right? Because we can't kill off the ones we already have. So we need new suspects and everybody. So in the draft of Cinderella that I was working on, I hadn't figured out who I cared about. And fortunately, with hearing all, like, it kind of happened in tandem of like hearing everyone's insight about Cinderella helped me realize which character was going to kind of embody some of those best traits. And I was like, aha, okay, this is her story. And everybody's helping her.
I think that connection is like, I just felt like the light bulb go off in my head about like why my first attempt at writing book 3 didn't work. And it's because I realized that I have a habit of killing people that I just don't like. And
that's a good reason to be a mystery writer.
It's you know, I again, when we talk about like channeling our inner angst into these stories, it's like I don't want to be bummed out about like the death of somebody that's like, oh man, like they were such a good person. Like, why did I kill them? But the problem with writing characters that are unlikable or who maybe nobody deserves to die, but maybe who you're not as sad that they have passed on.
Right.
It's, you don't really care. It's like, good, this person got what was coming to them, and like, why should I care about them? And that was the issue of like the person that I had as my victim was like, oh, this guy's awful. So I had to, that was like one of the big like things where I had to change. It's like, I gotta like switch this mindset that I have of, you know, the person always has to be a bad guy. Because then there's like even a more intense sense of justice, I think, that drives our characters forward. So
Absolutely.
that, I think that your point about like the connection is really valuable, especially to folks who are exploring writing a mystery, that making sure that you are connecting to your characters on that deeper level can help you with the process going forward.
Definitely.
And
yeah, I'm with you, Sarah. And unfortunately, I'm always the doom crier here, kind of using a little bit of a fantasy term there. We are halfway through the show already. This has been absolutely delightful. I do want to take a second and remind everybody, all of our viewers, if you have a question for Elle or if you have a comment, feel free to drop it into the Google chat. Sarah and I are keeping an eye on that. Want to say hi to Mark, Farmhouse Reader, and DHB, who have checked in with us to say hello. So thank you all for being here. And that does bring us to, though, now that I've gotten the timing thing out of the way, is I heard somebody talk about a giveaway earlier.
Yes. So we started off with the bad news, and now we've got the good news.
Yes.
Yes, we have our wonderful giveaway this evening. Elle is giving away a copy of her special edition of the Beauty and the Alchemist to one lucky viewer. Elle, would you like to tell everybody what the magic word is?
Ooh, can it be magic?
Yes, of
Yes.
course.
That's
Love
it. Then. That's
All right.
magic. That's a very easy one for people to type out too, hopefully.
Yes.
But if you misspell it, we will scoop it up. I guess in depending on what type of fantasy that you're reading, folks can spell magic, MAJY.
Oh no, that's right.
CK.
MAJIK.
Yeah, we've got a lot of stuff that you can
We'll
play
just go
with.
standard. Just MAGIC.
This is not Final Jeopardy. We will accept anything just so long you get close, folks.
And so while folks are entering into the giveaway, I need to talk about your release and point out that you mentioned that Beauty and the Alchemist came out in August of 2022. Do you want to share with folks when Cold as Snow and Mermaid for Danger came out as well?
Right. Yeah. So I did what's called rapid release, which is kind of like, it is an accepted strategy in the indie publishing community. Like, I'm not totally just off in left field. Other people have also done this. But I released, Beauty came out in August, Snow came out in September, and then Mermaid came out in October. Actually, there was a fourth one in October too. Cry Big Bad Wolf came out in October because it was set around Halloween, and it was Halloween in real life, and I just couldn't pass up that opportunity.
So tell us about the prep that went into having all of your books ready to be released. And this might be really, really helpful for our writers who are considering going the self-publishing route, the indie publishing route. Because I'm in awe that you're able to do that. But you're right. Like, a lot of there's a method to having more books in a series out at a time. Not only because it gives your readers like something to grab onto next, but it kind of it keeps up the hype. So do you want to share like a little bit about the process itself, and like what was something that you wish that you knew about it that you know now?
Oh, okay. Good question. Okay. I'll mull that over in the back of my brain while I kind of explain how. So the first thing is that, like, I really wasn't kidding when I said earlier that I took my time and researched like indie publishing and traditional publishing, right? So I took at least a year where I was, like dipping my toe into the cozy mystery world, the fantasy world, the reader world, the writer world. I was on social media, joining groups, going to conferences, joining Sisters in Crime, like looking around, getting the lay of the land. And while I was doing that, I was still writing, because I'm always writing. And the reason I bring that up is to point out that I had a backlog of books. It's not that I write a book in a month and that it immediately is ready. By the time I had made the choice to self-publish, Beauty was done and polished, and the others were kind of like at various stages waiting in the wings. And I was just very lucky because I had an editor who had a turnaround time that worked with me, right? So it came together fairly naturally because I had that kind of lead-in time. That said, especially as someone who is, normally relatively introverted, keeping up that hype was hard. And not only that, but keeping up with, like when you go to self-publish your book, there's a lot of anxiety that's involved, right? Because you got to like upload it here and there and over there. And is it proofread? And have the files been approved? And does the cover work? And like, there's a lot of technical stuff behind the scenes. and that wears on you after a while. So by the time November came around, I was really tired. And it's kind of a double-edged sword, because like I could say on one hand, like I wish I had known that going in, like just like not how much work, but like the toll that the work would take.
Mhm.
But also on the other hand, if I had known that, maybe I wouldn't have been as ambitious. So I don't know.
Well, that's an amazing story. I tip my hat to you.
Thank you.
I can't imagine, all of that, I'm exhausted after a 2-week release period, one like that is amazing. We have a question from the audience for you. We've actually have 2. So the first one is from our good buddy DHB, who would like to know where and or how does the story originate? Is the end written before you start writing the beginning, for example?
Ooh, okay. So I am like midway between what they call a plotter versus a pantser, right? So when I start, I have kind of an idea of like the big picture shape of the story, especially because I'm working with retold fairy tales. So I already have kind of the narrative there to riff off of. And it honestly, not to be repetitive, but now that I think about it, it starts with the characters for me. Is I'll have that fairy tale in mind and like which character, how the characters are going to fit in, and then it very much like starts from the beginning and goes from there. Like like I said, I'll have this kind of vague idea of where we're going, but how we get there, I have to see how the characters go.
Well, that's so cool. And kind of along the line, you've mentioned a couple of different times that you base your stories kind of on fairy tales. Do you have a specific source? Because, as we all know, fairy tales, it's more than just Disney.
Right? Yes.
So
absolutely.
do you,
Really?
believe it or not, yeah, I heard about these Grimm brothers, baby.
Oh gosh, when you look at the origins of these fairy tales, oh my gosh,
Yeah.
horror stories, more
Yes.
like it.
They can be pretty dark, very uncozy. That's for sure.
Yeah. So where do you how do you where is your source that
This is fun. I am a collector of certain things. One of those things is books. I can't take credit for all these. Those belong to my partner. But there's a bunch behind me. There's a bunch over there. There's a bunch all over the house. I and I didn't mention this in my intro and everything, but like I really love learning. I really love research. I studied history and archaeology. So I think I find it very, very fun to collect, anthologies of retold fairy tales or original fairy tales from all over the world. And I just hoard those like a book dragon. And it just kind of synthesizes into the novels eventually.
Well, that's so cool. That's so cool. I'd love to ask more about that, but we've got more questions now. So, let's see. Eric would like to know, is the real William as much of a curmudgeon as the William in your books?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. So William, my tortoise, my real William, he's a Russian tortoise. So he's about that big. And that's as big as he'll ever be. But he has like that very, and it's funny because I know he's like he's a tortoise, he's a reptile. People might say, oh, you can't really tell what they're thinking, but he has this very kind of like grumpy attitude towards him, towards everyone else.
He's a magical being.
Yes, he certainly thinks so.
Well, and Eric actually he had asked the same question I did, so I'm not going to take credit for it. Eric was interested to know about, your fairy tale sources. So I guess you mentioned kind of along that line that you've read fairy tales from all over the world. Mm-hmm. So you've talked about the fact that book 5 is going to be, kind of Cinderella. For books 1 through 4, can you just kind of real quickly give us the fairy tales that those are based on?
Yeah, absolutely. The first one, and hopefully the titles are clues, right? Hopefully it's not just like in my head, like obviously this makes sense. um, but so the first one, Beauty and the Alchemist, is a twist on Beauty and the Beast. Second one, Cold as Snow, is Snow White.
Okay.
Third one, Mermaid for Danger, is The Little Mermaid. And fourth one, Cry Big Bad Wolf. That one was like a hybrid of like The Little Boy Who Cried Wolf and the Three Little Pigs, like this whole idea of like the big bad wolf as a villain.
Okay. Very cool.
I'm curious about your fairy tale selection. Do you have to, and this is just my own ignorance on like copyrights and all of those fun things, like do you have to like, how much do you have to worry about that, or is it something that isn't an issue at all?
Yeah, most of them are so ancient, and the fun thing about fairy tales is that a lot of them have been retold by multiple cultures over the years. Like Cinderella, there's dozens and dozens of versions of Cinderella from all different cultures across the world. And part of that, and this is like where we can get into scholarly debate, because part of that, of course, is just because people travel, right? And they tell each other stories. And so now the story was in England and now it's moved to Portugal and they're putting their own spin on it, like that sort of thing. But there's also a line of thinking out there that some stories are just kind of universal. So not so much on the copyright worrying, at least not yet, fingers crossed. But I will add on to that just to say that that's kind of one of the fun things that I've found about having a fairy tale world and doing fairy tale retellings is like I try to stick to fairy tales, at least so far. I've tried to stick to fairy tales that are kind of immediately recognizable, especially to an American audience, right? Because that's where I am and that's who I write for primarily. But then the really fun thing is mixing in kind of the themes and twists from other cultures over the years too.
Okay, so I got to ask you, and I'm showing my age here. Have you ever seen the classic animated cartoons? Sorry for the redundancy there. Fractured Fairy Tales.
No, I've come across an anthology with that title.
That Fractured Fairy Tales. I watched them Saturday morning cartoons. There were little kind of snippets that be in between, the Looney Tunes, and they were always these unique, bizarre twists on traditional fairy tales. So you need to look those up. They're a lot of fun.
Cool. Yeah, like I said, I've seen a book with that title, but I'll have to look into that. That's neat. Yeah.
It looks like Mark agrees that Fractured Fairy Tales is a must-watch.
Cheers, Mark. Oh, part of Rocky and Bullwinkle. That's what it is, right, Mark? Yeah, thanks.
I do. Okay. I am familiar with Rocky and Bullwinkle.
Yes. Yeah. So Eric also would like to know. So, do you have a favorite fairy tale?
Oh boy. It changes. One of the long-standing, usually in the top 3 is Beauty and the Beast, right? So that's why I started there. But aside from that, it definitely changes depending on like what I've just discovered or what I'm working on writing. I have to admit, having just finished the draft of book 5, I do have a new appreciation for Cinderella. So yeah, it changes. I can't give a straight answer to that question.
I'm trying to think. JC, do you have a favorite fairy? What's a favorite fairy tale?
Oh wow, a favorite fairy tale. I don't think I really do. At the risk of sounding sexist, being a boy who grew up in the 60s and 70s, fairy tales were not a real big part of me growing up. But I really appreciate, Elle, you talking about the fact that so many fairy tales really are cross-cultural, because one of the things that I did in college is I took some time to read what amount to I have a book of Native American myths and legends.
Ooh,
so kind of fairy tales on those ends from that perspective, and that really opened my eyes to that idea that fairy tales they really are. They talk about these universal truths, and so many of them are literally hundreds, maybe thousands of years old. So, yeah, I guess probably if I had to pick a favorite one right now, I would say it's Beauty and the Beast. And the reason is because my younger kid is the trombone player, and he played in the pit orchestra during the Muncie Civic Theater's presentation of Beauty and the Beast last fall. So there you go. That's a long-winded way.
That's awesome.
How funny!
What about you, Sarah?
Well, my younger cousin, he was in high school. He just played the role as the Beast in his school's production of Beauty and the Beast just like 3 weeks ago, and I was just blown away by it. Beauty and the Beast, definitely love it. But I honestly have a really special place for Thumbelina. I don't know why. I just always really appreciated the gumption that she had, and I'm thinking of this based on like, oh gosh, it's definitely not a Disney movie. It's like one of the off-brand.
Yeah, I know which one it's. Yeah, yeah.
And I just loved it. Charo was in it. She played a frog. So that was always one that I just really loved. I think it was just like the secret idea of like, oh, maybe I'm a fairy. And my wings just haven't grown yet. So I think that's one that's always had a special place in my heart. Elle, tell us a little bit. We're closing it. I'll be the bearer of bad news this time. We're closing in on about 15 minutes left of our Bookish Hour. So folks, if you haven't already entered into the giveaway, make sure you type the word magic into Google Chat. You do have to be logged in to either YouTube or your Google account to do that. Elle, tell us so you're currently working on book 5. What else is next for you? Are you any book signings, any conferences, any events that you're going to, or your next release coming out?
All right. And I know, and you even warned me that you would ask, but it's like, especially with it being spring and like 2023 and pandemic behind us mostly, it's like, I feel like conference seasoning and book fairs are just like exploding. Conference season is what it feels like. So I am doing like some local book fairs and things if you're in New Jersey. I don't remember any of them off the top of my head, but if you go, they will absolutely be in my newsletter and social medias. I'm Elle Hartford everywhere. That's also my website is ellehartford.com. Let's see, as far as what I'm working on, so draft 5 is kind of like in its cooling off and editing period. That will probably be out in June. I haven't set an official date yet, but that's probably when it'll be here. And then I also do have another novella in the Pomegranate Cafe series, the spin-off that's like more romance and just lighthearted fun.
You didn't get to talk much about that.
Yeah.
I know, which is fine. It's the mysteries is where it's really at, but the romance is really fun and dear to my heart too. Yeah. So the next one of those will come out in July.
Well, JC will attest to the fact that, we do talk a lot about mystery, but when I myself have never really explored the romance genre until we have watched the Bookish Hour and we've had romance authors on and I've looked into their work and I was like, oh man, like it fills you with the same sense of just like peace and calm that a cozy mystery brings. But it has like just an even happier vibe to it. So I can definitely see like why that is just like such a fun escape, and especially since you're working with the same characters from from Belleville, like that must be a lot of fun to just give them a break from having to deal with mystery.
There's not always murders happening. Yeah. No, it is, and it's fun because it's you get to like dive into the side characters more and like what their lives are like. And I'm also like, and I always have been just a very hopeless romantic. So for a long time, like I would write essentially romances just for myself and I never shared them. So that's why it is a little, again, the mysteries are wonderful and special. The romance is also kind of special in its own way.
Absolutely. And that's, we've kind of hinted around this, but you write full-length novels, you write shorter stories. You write novellas. You kind of write all over the place. What, as far as length goes, I've read. I can't write short stories. I've tried.
Mm.
Just flat out can't do it. Can you talk to us about how you handle that challenge? Because each is a unique art form unto itself.
It is. You're so right. Oh, and I'm glad you asked this because I have one other piece of news. But yeah, I know I will admit I was very firmly in your camp. And like I can't write a short story. Like no way. How do you even do that? Until this kind of like I was doing writing contests and like the one with the prompt about fantasy and mystery. And so I started out by reading a lot of short stories, which honestly I didn't read a whole lot of short stories, but so I read a lot, just trying to like hoping to absorb by osmosis how they work. And then honestly just trying it over, like just writing, doing one for this prompt, doing one for that prompt. And I will say the really cool thing, I know we're running short on time, but the really fun thing about short stories is that you can explore ideas that maybe you don't want to commit a whole novel to. So it's really fun to like try things out or like do a really wacky, plot or scenario. I ended up eventually doing a whole series of short stories, the Carousel Capers, which is like a prequel to Beauty and the Beast, but they have like really wacky and fun plot lines because it's a short story. You don't have to suspend belief for too long. But on that note, I do have a short story in an upcoming anthology. It's coming out on April 11th. It's called A Bookworm of a Suspect, and it's for charity. So it's really cool.
Nice.
And there's
that's wonderful.
Ton of mystery stories in there. But yes.
That's
so
right. That's next week.
Out.
Yeah. Where can we get that?
That should be everywhere. I think I think it's 99. I'm not the publisher for that one, so okay. I didn't coordinate it. But I know it's everywhere, and I know that specifically on Amazon, it's a 99-cent pre-order.
Nice.
Ooh, so folks, make sure that you go scoop that. A Bookworm of a Suspect. There's a lot. There's a lot of folks in that anthology because I've seen it like massive. Everyone's like, oh, I'm in this anthology. I was like, oh wow, like it looks really fun. So
it's massive. Yeah.
a lot of great authors to check out there.
Mm-hmm.
Elle, this has been so much fun. There's so many more things that I think that we could get into it and talk about, and hopefully you'll come back and have maybe a bookish moment with us when you have book 5 is released. But as we begin to wind down our evening, I'm going to be tabulating our winner for the giveaway. Folks, make sure that if you haven't typed the word magic in, that you do so. And while I am doing that, what are we reading? What are we watching? Jim, you want to tell us what is on your docket?
So yesterday, the day before, I finished my advanced review copy of Tag Me for Murder, which is Sarah's latest, which will be out here in a couple weeks, April 25th. Absolutely loved it. Haven't put up a review yet because I've just been kind of, enjoying kind of the afterglow. So be on the lookout for that. Also, I just read Joan Long's Agatha nominated The Finalist, which is a thriller that's kind of, if you imagine a mashup of what I think of Survivor meets And Then There Were None. So that was a lot of fun. And then what I'm watching is I have started in on season 4 of The Worst Family in America, Succession. And it reminds me that, there are worse families than mine. So I mean, talk about doing some plotting and some dastardly deeds. That show just has it all. So but on a lighter note, I've also been watching The Mandalorian, which is a lot of fun too. So for you sci-fi fans, you can't go wrong with Mando and Grogu. So how about you, Elle? What have you been watching, reading, listening to?
Ooh, I've been kind of like on a really classic kick. So like we've been watching Murder, She Wrote.
Nice.
And Old Sailor Moon. We were talking about that before the show. And then also like on the reading front too, though, like I've been going through some old Agatha Christie's. I read Death Comes as the End recently, and I loved it. It's not Poirot or Marple or anyone. It's there's no like, famous detective, but it's set in ancient Egypt, which is really super cool.
Yeah.
At least for like a history nerd like me, I enjoyed it. But I've also been reading through some Nancy Drews that I've been like stocked away. So it's, like I said, very classic. And then podcast, if anyone likes true crime, I've been listening to a lot of Sinisterhood. They're two they're like professional comedians, but then one of them's also a lawyer, and they'll go through like crime, but also like mythical creatures or, strange sightings or like that sort of thing. And they're very fun.
That sounds amazing. I was like,
Yeah.
I'm literally like, I need to write this down because
they are a lot of fun.
that sounds absolutely wonderful.
Sarah, what do you got?
Well, Elle stole my thunder a little bit because I too have been reading Nancy Drew in preparation for my panel at Malice Domestic. I am the moderator for How Did Nancy Drew Influence You? Which is like the most iconic question of all time because Nancy is the reason why I love mystery so much. So I'm just like completely fangirling over here, but also like trying to be like, oh, how do I come up with these professional questions when all I do is just want to gush about how much I love her. So I've been revisiting my old collection of Nancy Drew books that my mom sent me. She was very kind to get them from the barn and send them down to me. On my anime or my manga journey, I have discovered it's called A Side Character's Love Story, and I'm already on volume 14 and so sad that like it's the last one that is available right now. But it's another one of those like slice of life, just like two people in college, they meet, they fall in love. It's beautiful. Love it. It's like my favorite bedtime story. As for what I'm watching, and I was like, as soon as we finished watching this show, I was like, oh my gosh, I can't wait to tell folks on the Bookish Hour about this because it was such a well done murder mystery. It was called The Pembroke Murders. It is it's based on a true story, which I think is why I enjoyed it so much because a lot of the mysteries that I've been seeing lately just have these like really like intense plot lines that I'm like, this doesn't really happen in real life, guys, does it?
Okay.
So this one, like, because it was a real story, it just felt like so real, but like the way that it was structured was really, really intelligent and kind of almost reassuring and calming. Luke Evans is the DS sergeant or detective sergeant who's like leading this team of people who are trying to catch the Wales' most prolific serial killer. So good. It's a 3-part mini series. It wraps up wonderfully. Can't recommend it enough. It's on BritBox. It was really, really good. I was very much pleased by the discovery of it. So if you are looking for a true crime adaptation, definitely recommend. But yeah, that's been on what I've been consuming these past 2 weeks since we last chatted. And we will be chatting again on April 20th. We have Tris Esden joining us. She is going to be talking about her upcoming novel, A Wealth of Deception, which I love saying. It's such a fun title. Much like Beauty and the Alchemist. Elle, I don't know if you know this, but like alchemy is like one of my favorite words. So like I just love it so much. And so that being said, we have to announce the winner of your special edition copy of Beauty and the Alchemist. And drum roll, please, Mr. Mark Baker.
All right, Mark.
Congratulations. Mark, go ahead and I have your email, and that's really all we need, I think, right, Elle?
Yes.
Perfect. All right. So Mark, we will be in touch with your prize. Congratulations. Elle, again, thank you so much for coming on the Bookish Hour and chatting with us. This was a delightful conversation. And again, please feel free to come back anytime because we can always talk.
Oh my goodness.
Talk
Thank
more
you so
wonderful
much for having
fantasy
me.
fairy tales. Yes, thank you. And to our wonderful viewers who joined us live, thank you so much for being here with us on this Thursday evening. And we hope that we will see you back when we are on our April 20th episode. Make sure, if you already haven't, head to our website, www.itsbookishtime.com. We now have the ability to send out email notifications about when we have a episode coming out, so you don't have to rely on your YouTube account giving you a notification or anything. We'll now send you a gentle reminder that we have a show coming up. That was a term that we used back when I was in healthcare technology, where it was like, oh, a gentle reminder for physicians to do this. And it was just something that always stuck with me. So
Like, whatever.
but everybody, thank you so much for being here for another episode of the Bookish Hour. We very much appreciate your time and support, and we will see you during our next episode. Until then, stay bookish. Have a good night, everybody.
Thanks.
Bye.